You do not possess the land on which you reside. You lack control over the infrastructure that sustains your daily life. The prices for housing, energy, healthcare, and loans are determined by forces beyond your influence. Yet still, each month you find yourself obligated to pay rent. Not to a lord residing in a grand castle, but to a system that dictates access rather than opportunities. This situation raises an unsettling question. At what point does our economy cease to be contemporary and start exhibiting traits reminiscent of feudalism? Welcome to a world where finance intersects with history and power dynamics, where nothing is as straightforward as it may appear. This period represented a historical exception rather than the norm. Although land had lost its dominant status, property never relinquished its influence. It merely transformed its nature. Factories evolved into corporations, and traditional ownership was supplanted by intricate financial instruments. Infrastructure became synonymous with balance sheets, reflecting the changing dynamics of wealth distribution. Gradually and almost imperceptibly, property began to concentrate once more, not through conquest or forceful means but via market mechanisms. There were no flags to wave or declarations made, no villains conspiring behind the scenes, only the underlying incentives at play. By the conclusion of the 20th century, the logic underpinning economic systems shifted once again. Capital became increasingly mobile as assets began to appreciate at rates surpassing wage growth. The financial realm outpaced production capabilities, leading to an environment where access to critical resources such as housing, education, healthcare, and energy increasingly hinged on continuous payments rather than outright ownership. Old obligations resurfaced under new guises. Loyalty transformed into debt responsibilities while servitude morphed into subscription models. Traditional land ownership gave way to ongoing rental agreements. The language surrounding these concepts softened considerably even as the structure remained unchanged. If there were to be an award for economic euphemisms, contemporary systems would undoubtedly stand atop that pedestal today. For what replaced feudal obligations was not true freedom but conditional access masquerading as empowerment. One could reside anywhere, provided they could meet payment demands. Mobility was granted only if credit ratings permitted it. Participation in various aspects of life depended solely on one's ability to remain financially viable. Unlike medieval serfs who labored under oppressive conditions without any claim to property rights, today's workers are told that their circumstances represent expanded opportunities for personal agency. The illusion of choice often feels like freedom, even when options appear strikingly similar or limited in scope. This comparison reveals uncomfortable truths about dependency structures across different eras. Feudalism was defined not merely by cruelty but by a system where individuals relied on resources they did not own. Dependency does not necessitate grand castles or overt displays of power. It arises simply when essential assets needed for survival belong to others. In medieval times, serfs depended on land that was entirely outside their control. In contrast, modern employees find themselves reliant upon housing markets, infrastructure systems, digital platforms, and financial frameworks that remain beyond their ownership purview. Though the tools have changed over time, the fundamental logic continues unabated, and much like feudalism itself, contemporary systems do not require malice or malevolence to maintain stability and perpetuate existing hierarchies. Acceptance is all that is required. The majority of individuals who opposed feudalism did not do so because of its inherent injustice. They tolerated it largely due to the scarcity of viable alternatives. This fundamental aspect deserves our attention, especially in contemporary society. Today, when people feel cornered, it is rarely a result of legislative constraints. Instead, it is often a consequence of rising costs and diminishing opportunities. The dynamics of influence have shifted significantly over time. Access to resources has once again become conditional, not through explicit decrees but through a gradual and intentional drift in societal structures. Before we can discuss the fairness, sustainability, or inevitability of these changes, we must first comprehend their origins. This system did not materialize overnight. Rather, it evolved amidst the quiet concentration of wealth, the shifting of risks onto the less privileged, and an increasing preference for stability over mobility. Once this pattern becomes clear, recognizing parallels with historical systems becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Feudalism has not simply vanished from our world. It has adapted to conceal itself beneath layers of modernity. As property ownership became more centralized again, the system did not need to announce a return to hierarchical structures overtly. Hierarchies do not emerge through proclamations. They are constructed through economic realities and pricing mechanisms that dictate value. When individuals hear the term feudalism, they often conjure images of knights clad in armor, majestic castles, kings ruling over vast territories, and serfs bound to the soil. This notion feels distant, primitive, and outdated, a relic overshadowed by the advances of modernity. However, feudalism was not merely about swords or noble titles. It was fundamentally about control over productive assets. The acceleration of this shift occurred when financial systems began serving a purpose beyond supporting the real economy. They started reorganizing it entirely. As capital gained greater mobility, assets began to outshine traditional production methods in terms of worth. Housing transitioned from being merely a shelter to becoming a valuable asset for wealth preservation. Infrastructure evolved from being a public necessity into an investment vehicle, while education changed from simple preparation into a leveraged financial tool requiring long-term repayment plans. With each transformation in these areas, ownership continued to drift further away from those who relied on these very resources for their livelihood. This marks the point at which the system quietly completed its evolution into something new and complex. In a feudal economy, wealth was generated by exerting control over land and its productive potential. In contrast, in today's financial economy, wealth accumulation stems from controlling assets whose values appreciate at rates surpassing those of labor income. The underlying principle remains unchanged. Only the instruments have transformed significantly. Those who hold appreciating assets automatically accumulate wealth through leverage and financial instruments designed to enhance their holdings. Meanwhile, individuals relying solely on wages find themselves lagging behind despite diligent effort and commitment to work ethic. Productivity may increase overall within various sectors. However, ownership consistently captures the benefits produced by that productivity surge. Labor may remain mobile within this intricate system, yet daily life becomes an increasingly expensive endeavor for many. The system does not need to penalize hard work directly. Rather, it rewards asset ownership disproportionately more than labor contributions. In this environment, debt fills the gaps left by systemic inequalities, not as an indicator of failure but as an intrinsic characteristic of modern economic structures. It serves as both a mechanism for maintaining status quo disparities and a reflection of how far removed many are from true economic security and empowerment in today's world. When wages struggle to keep pace with the soaring prices of assets, credit acts as a vital link between income and survival. Mortgages have come to replace true land ownership, student loans have taken the place of apprenticeships, and consumer debt has filled the void left by traditional savings. Every financial obligation is cleverly framed as an opportunity, while each payment is marketed as a step toward progress. However, debt subtly binds future labor to the costs established in the past. Just as a serf in medieval times was tied to land that was not theirs, contemporary workers find themselves tethered to financial commitments they have previously signed. The language may differ greatly, but the weight of responsibility remains the same. This is why social mobility feels increasingly elusive today, not merely due to legal constraints but rather economic ones. You might consider relocating to a different city or changing jobs in search of new beginnings. Yet, the cost associated with starting afresh continues to escalate year after year. If you miss a payment, the system promptly reminds you who holds the reins of access. Nothing speaks louder about one's freedom than the necessity of seeking consent for basic existence. At this juncture, some may counter these observations, arguing that such comparisons stretch credulity. They insist that modern existence bears little resemblance to feudalism and that no one is actually forced to remain in their current situation. While they are technically correct, the dynamics have shifted. What we see now resembles a form of feudalism 2.0 where dependency replaces chains. In medieval Europe, land served as the cornerstone of existence, providing food, shelter, security, and the very means of survival. Control over land equated to control over life itself. If one lacked ownership of this essential resource, their opportunities were severely curtailed, regardless of how hard they labored. The plight of peasants stemmed not from laziness but from their disempowerment. They were constrained because they did not own what truly mattered to them. The medieval serf could not leave because their very survival hinged upon the land they worked. In contrast, today's individual possesses the ability to walk away, but at a significant cost, forfeiting access entirely. Access to housing becomes unattainable. Credit slips beyond reach. Healthcare becomes a luxury few can muster. Stability evaporates like mist in sunlight. This is not outright coercion. It resembles conditioning instead. The system thrives precisely because it does not seem oppressive. It appears rather normal and accepted by many. People do not rise against rising rents. They adjust their budgets accordingly, often sacrificing needs for wants instead of challenging inflationary pressures on assets. They pursue profits relentlessly rather than questioning the concentration of wealth around them. In essence, they turn their blame inward. This reflects a remarkable aspect of today's hierarchy. It does not demand obedience. Rather, it incentivizes compliance with its unwritten rules. And when instability surfaces, whether through inflation spikes or market bubbles bursting, the system reacts predictably, adhering closely to what it has learned through experience. Safeguarding assets takes precedence above all else. Liquidity flows upward while losses are socialized across broader segments of society. Stability is temporarily restored by reinforcing existing structures that contributed to these imbalances in the first place. If there were an Olympic medal for systemic consistency, discipline would undoubtedly take home gold. Each intervention teaches society an enduring lesson. Property must be protected at all costs while managing dependence becomes paramount. The cycle persists effortlessly as individuals navigate this complex landscape of expectations and obligations crafted over generations. A landscape where true freedom seems perpetually just out of reach. This is not a moral judgment. It is simply an observation of our current reality. Once this realization dawns upon you, the pervasive anxiety surrounding modern economies will begin to make sense. People are not anxious due to irrationality. Rather, their concerns stem from a shift in the mechanisms of influence that now operate against them. They may feel productive yet simultaneously insecure, engaged in work but also exposed to vulnerability. They experience freedom but remain tethered by dependencies that seem unbreakable. There is a growing intuition among individuals that their hard work does not guarantee the safety it once did. Security increasingly appears to hinge on ownership, which many find unattainable. This situation reflects not a cultural failure but rather a structural one within society. The collapse of feudal systems did not occur because people acknowledged their inherent injustices. It happened when alternative systems emerged that redistributed property in such a way that dependency became obsolete. This brings us to an uncomfortable conclusion. If property continues to concentrate in fewer hands, the need for dependence diminishes naturally. This regression does not depend on overt violence. Instead, it manifests through financial statements and balance sheets that tell a story of inequality. Therefore, the critical question is not whether this system is fair or just. Fairness holds little significance for a system indifferent to moral considerations. What truly matters is whether society can maintain stability when most individuals are participants without ownership. These participants bear risks without reaping rewards, leasing stability rather than creating it themselves. The paradox here is striking. Stability without mobility inevitably leads to stagnation, and throughout history, stagnation has been the very thing that systems dread most intensely. This does not imply an inevitable collapse. Rather, it highlights the necessity for awareness and understanding of what has been termed Feudalism 2.0. Recognizing this phenomenon should not lead to despair but clarity, a recognition that contemporary freedom exists along a spectrum shaped by ownership, influence, and access. The closer one finds themselves to ownership, the more resilient they become, not necessarily due to greater intelligence but because the system itself has been designed to protect those who possess wealth and property. Consequently, they entered into stable yet profoundly unequal agreements. Labor exchanged for access, loyalty traded for protection, rent paid for mere survival. This arrangement was far from chaotic. It imposed order upon society. Feudalism thrived precisely because it minimized uncertainty. Everyone understood their role within the hierarchy. Social mobility was scarce. property ownership remained concentrated in the hands of a few. During this time period, stability took precedence over freedom, a crucial aspect often overlooked in contemporary discussions. This truth echoes throughout history. Power does not vanish. It reorganizes itself into new forms and structures. Economic systems do not simply perish. They evolve, carrying forward their underlying logic into fresh frameworks. Feudalism did not meet its demise with the crumbling of castles. It faded away only when the realm of ownership expanded significantly. Yet, as soon as this domain contracted once again, feudal principles resurfaced with renewed vigor. In essence, we encounter this same mechanism across centuries, different eras but similar patterns manifesting repeatedly through time. Understanding these dynamics provides invaluable insights into our current circumstances and future possibilities. History holds answers waiting to be uncovered. It merely requires us to seek them out diligently and thoughtfully. The evolution of societal structures invites us to reflect deeply on our roles within them and reassess our perceptions of ownership and security in an ever-changing landscape. The journey toward comprehension demands engagement with these intricate relationships between power, property, and individual agency, a quest well worth undertaking for anyone wishing to navigate the complexities of our modern world more effectively. Feudalism did not vanish because it proved inefficient or obsolete. Rather, it was dismantled when something else temporarily eclipsed the significance of land, capital itself. The process of industrialization shattered the monopoly that land had held over survival for centuries. Factories began replacing fertile fields while cities supplanted estates. Wages emerged as a substitute for feudal obligations, allowing individuals for the first time to earn a living without owning fundamental assets. This transformation encapsulated the grand promise of modern economies. One no longer needed land. What mattered were skills and capabilities. Inheritance ceased to be a requisite. Hard work became essential instead. Permission was no longer necessary. Employment became paramount. While property still held importance, it was no longer everything that defined one's worth or success. For a significant period, simply having access to income proved sufficient for many people's needs and aspirations. This era marked a seismic shift in societal structures and personal agency, a change that reshaped lives and laid the groundwork for contemporary economic systems we experience today. It illuminated new pathways toward prosperity while simultaneously redefining relationships between individuals and resources in ways that reverberate through our lives even now. In this ongoing narrative where money intertwines with power and historical context, we must continually examine how these themes manifest in our current reality, reflecting on both progress made and challenges that persist as we navigate an ever-evolving landscape shaped by forces both ancient and modern alike. The 19th and 20th centuries ushered in a remarkable historical phenomenon: the emergence of a substantial middle class characterized by rising incomes, expanding property ownership, and genuine social mobility. During this time, housing became increasingly affordable, allowing more people to secure their own homes. Savings began to hold significant value, marking a shift in how individuals perceived financial security. Labor gained newfound leverage in the economic landscape, resulting in notable advancements in productivity that, while imperfect, greatly enhanced the quality of life for many. This era imparted a crucial lesson to society. They believed these improvements were permanent fixtures of modern existence. However, what they encountered was not a new equilibrium but rather an extraordinary anomaly.